Tonight, the United States is engaged in expanding military action against Iran. Political lines at home are hardening just as quickly as battle lines abroad. And the question now isn't simply whether this was justified, it's whether anyone fully understands the cost of what comes next. Let's get to the breaking news first. U.S. forces have widened operations across multiple targets inside Iran, and Pentagon officials say the objective is to degrade strategic capabilities. At the same time, regional actors are responding, repositioning assets, and retaliatory threats are no longer theoretical. And as military activity expands abroad, political tensions is rising at home. Several diplomatic lawmakers are preparing a War Powers Act challenge, arguing Congress must reassert its authority. Meanwhile, administration officials maintain the actions fall within existing executive powers. Protests are forming in major cities and counter-protests are emerging alongside them. Iranians around the world are celebrating not only the U.S.-Israeli strike on Iran, but the death of the Ayatollah and his regime. Beyond Washington, diplomatic strain is widening. European allies are urging restraint while regional governments are reinforcing security postures. At the same time, oil prices are climbing and global markets are responding with volatility. Shipping routes and energy trades are pricing in extended instability. So this is no longer a single headline, it's a chain reaction. Military escalation and political fracture, economic volatility and diplomatic uncertainty, and unanswered questions about duration, deterrence, and long-term cost. This is The Turn, and I'm Robert Peel. If you enjoy the news with clarity, like and subscribe. We broadcast every Monday through Friday between 4 and 5 sometime. Stick around. Now it's my turn. Every morning in America, Democrats open a cereal box, not for breakfast, for instructions. Because whatever Trump did overnight, today's flavor, yesterday. Trade war, today. War powers, tomorrow. Windmills, it's not strategy today anymore. It's a scratch-off ticket. And the prize inside, doom. Strike Iran, illegal. Doesn't matter how, doesn't matter why, illegal. We don't wait for intelligence, we wait for adjectives. Unconstitutional, authoritarian, existential. The missiles are still in the air, and we're already drafting the obituary for democracy. War powers were 12 hours in, and suddenly everyone's a constitutional historian. It's impressive. We can't balance a budget, but we can balance Article 2 from memory. Everything is historic, every move unprecedented, and every week most dangerous moments in American history. At this point, American history needs a helmet. Impeach, not debate, not investigate, impeach. We don't even know what the crime is yet, but we know the vibe. And the vibe is apocalypse. Again. Here's the dark part. Every action is tyranny. Real tyranny walks in unnoticed because the alarm never stops ringing. You can't live in DEFCON-1 for a decade and expect people to sprint, especially when they eventually sit down. They eventually scroll, and they eventually laugh. Meanwhile, budgets freeze, security fights turn into hashtags, and we talk about abolishing agencies. While missiles are real, that's not opposition, that's performance art. And we're predicting the end of the Republic. Some Iranian Americans in LA are literally celebrating the strike, same event, Two realities. One dumb cereal box of rocks. When outrage becomes automatic, it's not moral, it's mechanical. And mechanical outrage doesn't persuade, it exhausts. Is everything evil? If it is, nothing is shocking. If everything is collapse, nothing collapses. If every cereal box says emergency, it's not breakfast, it's branding. And when outrage becomes branding, it's not resistance, it's addiction. And addiction doesn't change anything, it just keeps you loud and useless. Kind of like these people. So that's the pattern. Now, let's get out of the metaphor and into the facts. Because while the cereal box soaks, at least these headlines are real. Welcome back. This is your headline news for Monday, March 2nd, 2026. What began as rising tension is now active confrontation. Allies are repositioning, adversaries are responding, and Washington is already split over what comes next. We begin tonight with breaking developments out of the Middle East. Military activity tied to the escalating conflict between the United States and Iran has now spread across multiple areas of the region. US and Israel coordinated strikes targeting Iranian military infrastructure, including missile systems and strategic command assets. As officials say, the objective is to degrade Iran's offensive capabilities and deter further escalation. As those strikes expand across key strategic sites, Iranian retaliatory actions begin with missile and drone systems activating across the region. Because retaliation extended beyond initial launch zones, regional military posture has tightened, with Allied forces elevating readiness levels. Although global leaders are signaling concern over broader destabilization, a unified diplomatic response has to emerge. There is no longer theoretical tension. This is kinetic conflict. As the situation intensifies overseas, reaction here at home is accelerating. Democratic leaders have moved quickly to condemn the strikes, framing the action as an unauthorized expansion of military engagement and calling it, in their words, an illegal war. Several members of Congress are pushing to invoke the War Powers Act as they seek to redistrict a formal review of the administration's authority to conduct sustained operations without congressional approval. While anti-war demonstrations take place in major U.S. cities, organizers argue the country risks entering another prolonged Middle East conflict. At the same time, segments of the Iranian American community are publicly celebrating the strikes, viewing them as direct blow against Iranian's ruling structure and potential opening for long-term challenge inside the country. While parts of the Democratic caucus work to constrain executive authority, many Iranian Americans directly affected by the regime policies are expressing support for decisive pressure against it. Beyond Washington's reaction is spreading just as quickly. Anti-US demonstrations have taken place near diplomatic facilities in several countries as security has been heightened at American embassies abroad. In parts of Europe, rallies have expressed support for pressure on Iran's leadership, even as officials caution against broader regional war. Within segments of the Iranian diaspora, celebrations have been visible, although other communities are expressing concern that escalation could bring wider instability. Because geopolitical conflict rarely remains contained, governments are monitoring both unrest and retaliatory risk. While governments debate and streets fill, financial markets are responding in real time. Oil prices have surged amid fears, supply disruptions, particularly around the Strait of Hormuz, a corridor responsible for a significant share of global energy transport. As shipping risk increases and insurance premiums rise, analysts warn that sustained disruption could push fuel costs higher worldwide. Global stock markets have shown volatility while investors move towards safe haven assets such as gold and the US dollar. Although defense and energy sectors have posted gains, aviation and travel sectors face pressure due to rising fuel costs and operational uncertainty. Because energy markets anchor the global trade, inflation risks are re entering the conversation. While the strikes were military in nature, the ripple effects are economic. We are watching two escalations unfold at once, one overseas, measured in missiles and shifting alliances, the other here at home, measured in political hardening and legal maneuvering. While military action has begun abroad, the political battle here is accelerating just as quickly. As Democrats move to invoke the War Powers Act, segments of the Iranian American community are openly celebrating what they see as a decisive strike against the regime. Because both reactions are happening simultaneously, the divide becomes impossible to ignore. Although foreign conflict has historically pressured nations toward unity, this moment is amplifying pre-existing fracture lines instead. As oil prices rise and markets respond, the economic dimension layers on top of the military and political ones. While the strikes may have been tactical, the consequences will be strategic. And because strategic consequences unfold over time, the only question that remains is this: how far does this expand, and who determines the limits? We will continue to monitor the developments overnight and bring verified updates as they unfold. For now, that is your headline news for Monday, March 2nd. And now, let's take a sharper turn. That's the official landscape. But there's another layer to this in the story, and it deserves a closer look. Rob's rant is next.
I might have to let it drop. Let it drop.
This is the segment where we stop reacting to headlines and start reacting to patterns. There's an old story about a boy who cried wolf. He wasn't confused, he wasn't mistaken, he chose to yell, "Wolf!" Maybe louder than that. And the village ran. There was no wolf. He did it again. They ran again. Still no wolf. Eventually, the village stopped responding. And when the wolf finally came, when the danger was real, no one believed him. And then he got eaten. The story isn't about a farm. It's about credibility. And credibility is something you can only get to spend once. Right now, we are watching a pattern. Every executive action, authoritarian. Every border enforcement policy, fascism. Every funding disagreement, democracy collapsing. Every news cycle, historic crisis. Is everything unprecedented? Because if it is, nothing is unprecedented. If everything is tyranny, nothing is tyranny. If every day is DEFCON-1, the public stops checking the radar. I am an American. That means I believe in opposition. I believe in challenging power. I believe in fierce debate. But debate requires discipline. It requires proportion, and it requires language that still has weight. When you escalate every disagreement into an apocalypse, you are not protecting democracy, you're exhausting it. When you label every policy you dislike as authoritarian, you weaken the word for when something actually crosses the line. And when outrage becomes daily routine, it stops being alarm. It becomes noise. You were elected to legislate, to write laws, to negotiate budgets to fund agencies to secure the border, to protect homeland security operations. Agencies do not run on outrage, they run on appropriations. They do not operate on press conferences, they operate on law. If the strategy is to oppose first and read later, condemn immediately and clarify eventually, that is not serious governance, that is reflex, and reflex is not leadership. Here is the normal. If you cry wolf every day, you train the country not to believe you. If you escalate every policy into existential threat, you hollow out the language needed to identify the real one. If you declare democracy dead every Tuesday, you will not believe when something truly dangerous happens on Wednesday. The boy in the story did not lose because the wolf was powerful. He lost because he destroyed trust. And once trust is gone, no speech can restore it. This country deserves adults who can debate without detonating vocabulary, adults who can disagree without declaring the republic finished, adults who can understand the credibility of one currency policy, cannot print, pass laws, do the work, stop yelling wolf. Now, if the language is being stretched this far, if words like fascism and crisis are being used this loosely, it raises a bigger question. What do the words actually mean anymore? Let's slow this down. Let's examine the language itself. It's time for the deep turn. This is the deep turn, where we put the moment under a microscope. Let's get into it. Okay, tonight we examine the extreme divide between left and right politics in America, not the outrage, the architecture. Political parties in this country did not begin as cultural enemies. They began as competing governing philosophies inside the same constitutional framework. Different interpretations of federal power, different approaches to economic policy, different priorities for preserving liberty. But the mission was shared: stability, union, continuity of the republic. In the mid-19th century, the disagreement hardened around slavery and states' rights. By 1861, the political conflict became armed conflict. The Civil War lasted 4 years. Hundreds of thousands, families split, churches divided, communities fractured. The war ended. The emotional residue did not vanish overnight. Over the next century, party platforms evolved, coalitions shifted, the New Deal redefined federal authority. The late 20th century saw ideological realignment across regions. The labels remained, the philosophies moved. Today, the divide operates differently. It is not primarily geographic, it is informational. Americans live inside separate media ecosystems. They interpret the same event through different narratives. Trust in institution has declined across the spectrum. Politics has moved beyond legislation and now shapes identity. It influences friendships, family gatherings, where people live, what they teach their children. When disagreement becomes identity, opposition feels existential. And when politics feels existential, escalation accelerates. Now, this is not the 1860s. There are no seceding states, but polarization, declining institution trust, and moral framing of opponents are familiar. Warning patterns. History shows internal division, weakens stability long before open conflict appears. The deeper question is structural, and are we debating policy inside a shared framework, or are we debating the framework itself? When citizens stop agreeing on the destination, every disagreement feels like a threat. This is where division intensifies, and this is why the turn runs deep. Now, let's turn it down. The volume does not need to match the noise. Division is real, escalation is optional. Political agreement does not require personal fracture. History shows what happens when it does. So here's the takeaway. Slow the reaction, question the framing, separate policy from identity. The Republic has survived division before. It survives when citizens choose discipline over drama. Thank you for watching The Turn. We're here on Monday through Friday. Clear culture, calm analysis, no spin. We'll see you next time. Tomorrow, sometime between 4 and 5. Have a wonderful afternoon.